8 trades that you need to make today before week 5 in order to put yourself in that spot to win your championship. Ty, the people on YouTube can already see it on their screen, but why don't you start us off with your first running back buy?
It's Joe Mixon, the running back 1 in usage before his ankle injury in week 2 against the Bears. Unfortunate. The hip drop tackle sucks. I think we can all agree on that. And the guy has been recovering from his ankle injury the last 2 weeks. Sounds like he's going to be day-to-day this week during practice, but there is still the unknown of how he'll look, if he's going to be 90% healthy the rest of the year. So there is a bit of risk with Joe Mixon now for the rest of the season. But like I said right off the top, this is the RB1 in usage before his injury. Okay. And an offense that is projected to improve as the year goes on. And if this Houston Texans offense could be anywhere near that top 5 offenses, Joe Mixon is going to be, 1, heavily utilized, and 2, find himself in a lot of scoring opportunities. You can find any kind of mid-tier player name. I will throw it like a Brian Robinson, a Tony Pollard. Unfortunately, he's on a bye week. Go package one of those guys and go upgrade to a Joe Mixon. Yes, again, the risk will be there because of his ankle injury, but you're getting a workhorse in an offense that I shouldn't say it's just almost everybody is projecting to be much better as the season continues.
Yeah, I think Houston's shown us enough that they're going to be in the red zone again this season. They're going to continue to score touchdowns. And if Mixon's getting all the rushing work and all the receiving work when he is out there, then obviously that's going to be, a good recipe for success. So there's really no reason not to want Joe Mixon. Like you said, we don't know for sure if he's even going to be back this week. But even if he's not, that just means the buy low is even deeper, right? The dip is deeper that you can go get him. You're going to pay less for him to sit on your bench. So he's a perfect guy. You're 3-1 right now. You can afford to go 3-2. Obviously, you want to go 5-1, not 3-2. I understand that. I'm not saying go lose your week, but you can afford to let Joe Mixon sit on your bench. Perfect guy to go get. Because like you said, the usage has just been insane for Joe Mixon so far. My next running back is another guy, Josh Jacobs, whose the usage has been unbelievable for so far this season, right? His first 3 games before last week, 16 rush attempts, 32 rush attempts in 14 attempts. Obviously, 32 attempts comes with Malik Willis at the quarterback position. So they're going to want to run the ball a little bit more in that game script and to take the ball out of his hands. But last week, 9 attempts, 51 yards, 4 receptions, 11.8 PPR fantasy points. The issue with last week is Jordan Love threw the ball 54 times. He didn't throw the ball more than 44 times all of last year. Ty, did you know that the last time the Packers as a team threw the ball more than 45 times was week 17 of 2019? It has been almost 5 years since this team's thrown the ball more than 45 times. So I don't know about you, but I'm not really predicting another 54 pass attempt week out of the Packers.
No, and again, let's keep in mind just their week 4 matchup against the Vikings. They were down 28-0 at one point, and then they were gifted a muffed punt that resulted in a touchdown before the end of the half. Yeah. So they very much needed to throw the ball. I don't think Green Bay is going to need to throw the ball as much as they did in future weeks. That just helps out Josh Jacobs because, again, we saw when they don't want to throw the ball, which is more times than not, I will say, that's just going to benefit Josh Jacobs.
Yeah. And with Love under center, he's averaging over 5 yards per carry. He's seen 3 and 6 targets in those 2 games with Jordan Love. So there's a lot to like with him on the field. And if you watch the Packers, like you said, in that first half, they were dominated and got bailed out by that muff punt at the end of the half. But if you watch Jordan Love in the second half, he finally looked comfortable again. And he was able to make throws, and that team was moving the ball up and down the field. If that's the way they're going to look rest of the season, Josh Jacobs, again, like Mixon, going to have a lot of red zone opportunities. I know Marshawn Lloyd's coming back off of IR, but Josh Jacobs is a bell cow. He's the same as Mixon. He is the bell cow of this offense. He is going to get the goal line carries. He's going to get the majority of the work.
Yeah, we saw some more Emmanuel Wilson too in this game. I'm not completely scared off by Emmanuel Wilson because even if this is going to be a 60-40 split, you know that Jacobs is going to get the more valuable touches in the offense, and he's still going to be involved enough in the receiving game that it's not like he's a one-dimensional fantasy asset like a David Montgomery is. So again, very similar to Houston, if Green Bay is going to be in more positions to score like we are projecting them to be, Josh Jacobs is eventually going to find the end zone. Like that, like it's inevitable. He's going to score at some point. So yes, even if like you brought up Marshawn Lloyd, even if he gets more involved, Emmanuel Wilson sticks around. You know that Jacobs is going to get the most valuable touches in that offense. And if they're going to score, you want that on your team.
Yeah, exactly. But Ty, let's talk the 93% again. We do it every week. Guys, we need to change this. 93% of you are freeloading on our content. I'm just kidding.
Which is fine. Which is fine.
But 93% of you are watching our content and not subscribed. And we just want to ask you to join the over 1,000 people who've subscribed to our channel in just over 2 months. Just over 3 months, I think, since we launched our new channel. So make sure, just turn that wrist a little bit, hit that subscribe button because we got 3 podcast episodes coming out a week. And you don't want to miss any of it because, Ty, it is league winning advice. And I got to say, I think this next wide receiver you're about to talk about is an absolute league winner.
Well, you may be a little biased just because of where you were coming from in the preseason, but look, Brian Thomas Jr. he's coming around. Okay. I don't think there's any other way to say it. Did we see the breakout in week 4? We might have. Okay. 6 catches, 9 targets, 86 yards and a touchdown. Good for the wide receiver 9 on the week. And for through the first 3 games of the season, and I'll say 4, this Jacksonville offense hasn't been great. So this feels a little off to talk about Brian Thomas as a guy to go buy because do you really want a piece of this Jacksonville offense? And I'm here to tell you that if you do have a piece, if you want a piece, it's Brian Thomas Jr. Okay. Through the first 3 games when you had Miami, Cleveland, and Buffalo, Miami and Buffalo are currently bottom 5 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Brian Thomas still averaged 12 points a game, which doesn't sound like a lot, but he was the wide receiver 33 in points per game. So he was performing as a flex option. And now, again, he finished as a top 10 wide receiver on the week. And according to Fantasy Points data, his first retarget rate by the week is great news because it went from 25% in week 1 to 17.4 in week 2. So it's a bit of a dip, but then it goes up to 22.4 in week 3 and 33.3 in week 4. They're wanting to get him the ball more. Okay. And again, if this was just the start, he is really in a pretty advantageous situation because you look at the remaining schedule for the Jaguars, 8 of the last 11 opponents in their schedule are in the top half of fantasy points and receiving yards allowed to wide receivers. So I think, again, it may be a little bit of a stretch to call a Jacksonville Jaguar a league winner this year, but gosh darn it, the dude, 1, looks incredible. 2, if they're going to get him the ball with that schedule, man, Brian Thomas could be a really, really valuable asset moving forward.
I told you guys this in our group chat before we started. I don't think it's crazy to say that in a couple of years, Brian Thomas is the best of this rookie class. I understand how good Malik McNabers is. I understand how good Marvin Harrison is. But this dude is so good down the field. He had, if you're watching the All 22 over on YouTube, you'll see the just great move that he had going, the double move. That was the word I was looking for. Similar to what Malik Nabers did. He's just not going to get the publicity because Trevor Lawrence completely overthrew him on what could have been a walk-in touchdown. So this day could have been even better. He could have been pushing 30 fantasy points, and then you really would have struggled to buy in on Brian Thomas this week. But yeah, I really could not agree more with you on BTJ.
And I'll just say real quick too, some people that have Brian Thomas, they may look at this past week and be like, I don't really want to give up 22 fantasy points. The point that you sell them on is, do you really think he's going to put up 22 again? Now, He may do it once or twice. But if he's going to give you like 14, 15, 16 a week, that's amazing, right? Because again, we went from 12 to 22. So again, people will look at that 22-point performance and be like, do I really want to give that up? And you just tell them he's not going to do it again, even though you well know that he's going to be a little more consistent than he has been this year.
Yeah, you could even point to what Roma Dunze did 2 weeks ago, where he put up a great week, and then this next week stinks. And speaking of Roma Dunze, we're going to stick with the Chicago Bears. We're going to talk about DJ Moore. And speaking of a way to sell someone on getting rid of DJ Moore, just send him the next gen route tree of DJ Moore for this last week that's going around Twitter right now, because it was disgusting. I mean, it was abysmal. And I'm not saying it's going to get a heck of a lot better with Shane Waldron. I understand how bad it's been, but I do think DJ Moore is getting enough volume that it's going to make up for some of the bad play calling. It's going to make up for some of the headaches that come with Caleb Williams. Right now, he's got 34 targets on the year, which is tied for 7th, 22 receptions, which is 7th. He's tied for 5th in red zone targets right now, 2 behind the leader. And he's only at 8.6 yards per reception with only 1 play over 20 yards. I understand Shane Waldron's calling this offense. I understand Caleb Williams has only had 1 game where he's really put up a lot of yards. But DJ Moore's career average is 14 yards per catch with some abysmal quarterback play. That's going to get better. He is not going to stay at 8 yards per reception. And especially if you see the volume continue, I got to imagine the yards are going to start coming. He's going to start finding the end zone a little bit more. Now, is it going to be double-digit times? Absolutely not. But we saw last year he put up 8 touchdowns with Justin Fields and Tyler Bagent. So I think he'll be all right from a quarterback perspective. And I think people are just so worried about the way the Bears have looked that this is your time to go buy DJ Moore.
Yeah, you hope that there's a second half resurgence. I shouldn't even call it a resurgence. A second half kind of maturity step in this Chicago offense, especially from Caleb Williams. And this, I want to go back to what we had talked about, this Bears wide receiver room during drafts, right? You've got Keenan Allen, you've got Rome Odunze, DJ Moore. DJ Moore is going to be on the field the most of the 3, right? Keenan Allen was almost, I shouldn't say exclusively. I was about to say that. That's not what I meant at all. He was on the field more often in 3 wide receiver sets, but then when they went down to 2 wide receiver sets, it was Rome and DJ Moore. But DJ Moore was on the field for all of it. So if there is a Bears wide receiver to target, right, with the best opportunity to put up fantasy points, it's DJ Moore.
Yeah, I think the floor for Moore this season is going to be 2023 DK Metcalf. That's kind of where I see him as, the alpha in the Shane Waldron offense. The offense never quite clicked right, but yet still saw enough volume, still was a good enough player that he's still going to be a top 25 option, right? Obviously, not where you want him for where you drafted him, but he's not going to kill you on the weekend. I think that's the floor for DJ Moore. I think the ceiling could be something similar to what we saw last year. Well, before we get to ourselves, we're going to hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
We are back, and we are ready for some sells, and we're going to start.
I see you changed up that intro, that re-intro a little bit. I like that. See, that was great.
I'm just experimenting out here, just trying something new, and I felt the power. I felt good, a little punch there. So
see, you're doing what we want Shane Waldron to do. Try something new.
Yes, thank you. Speaking of Shane Waldron, we're going to stick on his same team, Ty, aren't we? With your first running back sell.
Gross. It's DeAndre Swift. Do I really need to explain this? I mean, there was reports of Roschon Johnson getting more involved in the game plan for Chicago, and maybe that would have been true if DeAndre Swift did not just play the game of his life last week. When is DeAndre Swift ever going to have 16 attempts for 93 yards, a rushing touchdown, and 7 catches for 72 yards, I believe it was, putting up nearly 30 points? So again, when is DeAndre Swift ever going to finish as a top 3 back on a week this year? When is he ever going to put up 30 points on a week again? When is he ever going to be the leading receiver in a game on this team? It's not going to happen. Like, and we've talked about the struggles of DeAndre Swift in the previous weeks. Don't let this week sway you into believing that, like, oh, you know, like things are corrected, things are better now for DeAndre Swift. I no, he took advantage of a really, really nice matchup for him. Go package him and upgrade, because the headaches are going to continue this year. So I'm going to keep that one short and sweet as well. Not much there, but I hope it's apparent, and it's really easy to kind of put 2 and 2 together to be like, yeah, I can't rely on DeAndre Swift.
Definitely. And he had to rely on 7 receptions in this one. He's not seeing 7 receptions for 79 yards each week. I don't know if you remember back to last season when he popped off against Minnesota in week 2. 28 rush attempts, 175 yards and a touchdown. And everyone was like, he's here. Eagles, DeAndre Swift is that guy. He actually won a decent run after it, 15, 18, 17, 18 fantasy points. And then after that stretch, scored over 15 fantasy points one time for the rest of the season. So we've seen him be good in spurts. And that's our issue. Is when we started this podcast back almost 4 years ago now, Ty, we all loved DeAndre Swift. We all did. And we do want him to succeed. It's just, we've seen this story before where it looks great, it looks fun, and then it just doesn't connect. So I don't blame you. I want to sell on DeAndre Swift as well. I don't want to trust this team. DJ Moore is the only guy I'm really trusting on Chicago as a whole. And I understand there's a lot of people who are, that's even too rich for their blood. They're like, no, I'm not. I don't even want any part of this Chicago offense at this point. My running back sell is pretty similar, actually. Zack Moss for the Cincinnati Bengals, similar in the fact that scored 18 fantasy points, time to move on. And that's just what it is. He only plays 60% of snaps in this one. So his snap share came down. We saw more Chase Brown. Obviously, still seeing 4 receptions on 5 targets. You like to see. But Zack Moss is yet to top 60 rushing yards in a game this season. He's seen some snap, he's seen some passing volume. But if Chase Brown's going to play 40% of snaps, you're going to start losing that passing volume to Chase Brown. And the real kicker for me is just, we got to think of what division he's in. Zack Moss is going to play Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland 2 more times each. So there's 6 games where you're, against teams that you really don't want to run against. And this Baltimore team's 1-3. So it's not like we're looking at a team that's going to be ahead, running the ball, trying to establish it on the ground. They tried this week against Carolina, and Zack Moss couldn't average 4 yards per carry. You're not going to have much of a better matchup running the ball than that. So I think Zack Moss was kind of always he's going to be all right. If he gets a pop week, try to sell him high, kind of a guy for me. And that's exactly what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, this Cincinnati backfield just continues to kind of shift throughout the season, so Zack Moss, Chase Brown both have 15 carries. Chase Brown was arguably the more efficient or hotter hand in terms of carries this week, just with 80 rushing yards. But Zack Moss continues to get all of the passing down work, and we've seen Zack Moss handle the goal line carries before. Just so happened this past week, it was Chase Brown. So it's weird in the sense that, like, you can't exactly like stake a claim on Zack Moss, because again, the backfield can, shift from one week to another. And I think that's ultimately why we would both agree on saying that he's a sell, just because there's no way of really knowing, when it's going to be a good, like, Zack Moss week. Yeah, like 15 carries and 4 catches is a pretty solid week, right? Like he finished with 17 fantasy points. This is more so just about potential inconsistencies, the frustration of like, gosh, do I trust Zack Moss this week? And like you said, in this division, when you got the Steelers and the Ravens and the Browns, is it really, like, do you really want to, put your eggs in the Zack Moss basket? And I have a tough time doing that.
Yeah, I agree. And something I also agree on, Ty, with a lot of our friends over at our Discord is that I'll make a trade or have a trade ready to send, and I feel really confident. And then that little bit of doubt just seeps in, like, am I actually getting ripped off here? Am I sending this thinking it's a good trade? And that's why we have our Discord. So that if you guys want to send trades, if you want start sit questions, if you're wondering if I should pick up a guy or drop a guy on waivers, you can throw it in our Discord, and actual people are going to respond to you and say, nah, I wouldn't do this. Yes, I would do this. That's why we created this, because we wanted a fantasy football community that was working together. We wanted somewhere where we could go, to ask those questions, where we could go to answer your guys' questions. So make sure on this video or on the audio podcast that you're listening to go and join our Discord, because it's completely free. And we have our full weekly rankings. We do our start sit video tomorrow, or podcast tomorrow, excuse me. But we have our full ranking. So you're going to get 24 people tomorrow. Well, you can get over 100 people, 100 players ranked out in our rankings if you head on over to our Discord. And Ty, we kind of have some similarities here with our buys and sells. Now we got two guys who are in the same game as our wide receiver sells. So why don't you start us off with your final sell and your wide receiver sell?
It's Michael Pittman Jr. We have talked extensively about why we weren't like huge Michael Pittman fans in drafts this year. There were some drafts where people would consider him a top 15 wide receiver because like, oh, he's getting Anthony Richardson back. But we were all saying like, it's not exactly like the quarterback upgrade that is necessary to kind of take that next step into that upper echelon of wide receivers. Week 4 was finally a good week for Michael Pittman Jr., right? 17.3, 9 targets, 6 catches, 113 yards. Those were all season highs. But he combined for just 19.8 in the first 3 weeks of the season. So, yes, it's really good to see one of your guys that, again, you drafted, that you invested in, start to come through. But how much of this game was Anthony Richardson versus Joe Flacco? And you look at the plays with Richardson, 2 catches, 3 targets for 60 yards. And it's nice to see Pittman kind of being used more downfield, because that was always the one thing about Pittman. He had just never been the downfield guy, and he actually caught 2 balls downfield. But the first ball should have been picked off. Like, Richardson didn't even see a corner, essentially sitting on Michael Pittman's post route that essentially Michael Pittman could have literally gotten his head blown off had that ball been, it could have been a disaster, I think is the safest way to say it. But with Joe Flacco, then Michael Pittman had 4 catches on 6 targets for 53 yards. Now, Flacco did play the majority of the game. Like, he played like second quarter through the end of the game. So yes, it's really easy just to sit there and go, well, Flacco's in the game more, so he's going to have more stats with Flacco. Sure, I get it. But I'm just going to sell people on the fact that Michael Pittman's 2 catches went for 32 yards and 28 yards, because that's not been that hasn't been the norm for Pittman, because his highest and longest catch before this last week, I should say, was 13 yards. So I'm expecting more inconsistencies in this passing attack from the Colts. And Richardson should be healthy this week. That was reported essentially on Monday morning that Richardson will be just fine. So this is very similar to DeAndre Swift in the sense that, like, you finally got the good game. You finally got the good week. Go package him and go try to upgrade, because we could be in for more. I keep using the word headaches. You could be in for more of that later on this year.
Yeah, Anthony Richardson through the first 3 weeks was QB 25 in pass attempts.
No.
With a 49% completion percentage. He was quarterback 30 in pass completions.
Okay, we get it. We get it. We get it.
So it's just, all I'm saying is for a guy like Michael Pittman, who's been reliant on volume over the last couple of years, there is no volume here. There just isn't. That's where the issue really lies with him for me. That's where I had the issue before, is because we've seen Anthony Richardson win games. We've seen Anthony Richardson produce from a fantasy perspective, putting up games, throwing 19 times, completing 9 of them, right? He's won like 2 games like that over his career, both having great fantasy weeks. But Michael Pittman's going to suffer because of that, because he's not the down the field guy, like you said. Yes, great. He had 2 catches down the field. That's not who he is. That's not the way they use him. That's not the way he's played. So, yeah, it's just too much that just scares me off of Michael Pittman.
Yeah, and Josh Downs being involved in this offense now too. By the way, Josh Downs at back-to-back weeks has over a 30% target rate. That can't be ignored. That when Josh Downs gets on the field, he's being targeted. That just takes away more opportunities for Michael Pittman then.
Yeah, would definitely agree with that. And on the other side of the ball, we saw George Pickens light it up. 7 receptions, 11 targets, 113 yards, 16.3 fantasy points because he had a fumble. And you'll see it on the all 22 if you're on YouTube. Dude dropped a wide open touchdown too. I mean, like hit him in the hand. I think it hit him in the face mask because it went right through his hands. That's how much of a drop that it was, which is funny. He drives you nuts kind of, because he'll make those crazy catches, right? We've seen the George Pickens highlights, and then he has like that, or remember the one last year, Ty, where he had 15 yards of space to get 2 feet down and only got just some brutal mistakes. Not to pick on the guy, but he's kind of similar to Josh Jacobs in the way that the Packers aren't going to throw the ball 54 times. Justin Fields isn't going to throw for 300 plus again this season. He's done that one other time in his career. In the first 3 weeks, he went 156 passing yards, 117 passing yards, and 254 passing yards with only 3 passing touchdowns. Or this offense only had 3 touchdowns that entire start. This is his first week inside the top 24. And I'm going to kind of compare him to Drake London of last year, the alpha in the Arthur Smith offense, with a quarterback who's not necessarily the greatest thrower, but a decent enough runner. Drake London had 3 top 20 finishes. If you could get rid of George Pickens like he's a top 24 wide receiver right now to go get somebody who's going to be a little bit more consistent, then take that all day, because, yeah, you might have 3 more games like this the rest of the season, but is that really what you want in your starting lineup, where you're just hoping that it's the George Pickens week? No, absolutely not. And then on top of that, we have the rumors Devontae Adams wants to be traded. You know who might be looking for a wide receiver? The Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if it does, that even tanks George Pickens' value even more. So yeah, I would say get rid of George Pickens. Unlike Ty, I didn't come prepared with the sales pitch that you guys all need. I think we need to applaud Ty on that. He gave you guys a sales pitch for each player. But I would move on from George Pickens at this point.
No, you hit the nail right on the head of the tier jump that you think you could get with a guy like George Pickens. I don't think we are expecting to happen this year, and that's why you should sell. Just because we know, like George Pickens can have some good games. Like in week 1 against the Falcons, what was it? He finished with 85 yards. So, 6 catches, 85 yards. So he can have semi-productive weeks, and I shouldn't even call it semi-productive. 14 points is productive, right? Let's kind of keep things in perspective here. But we know that this Pittsburgh Steelers team, they want to control the clock and they want to control the line of scrimmage. That doesn't necessarily feed into good productive weeks, all the time for George Pickens. So while you may have games like we just saw, right, 7 catches over 100 yards, we're essentially just saying, hey, this is not a guy that can make that jump into the top 25 wide receivers. He's going to be a flex play more weeks than not. And when the Steelers are favored, it's going to be tough to really kind of put Pickens into your lineup, because he could have a game like he did against the Chargers where he had 5 catches, 57 yards. That's all you're going to get, right? So just understand that, like with Pickens, if you can sell people on like he can be a top 25 guy, like he can be, a reliable piece in your lineup, I think we're just saying like there's still enough with this Pittsburgh offense that we can't fully rely and trust on Pickens to be in our lineups week in, week out.
I don't think I could have summed it up any better than that. So thank you, sir. But that wraps it up for today. Make sure you're following us on the X. I'm at CamelFFF. Tyler's at Tyler_Plath. Following us on all the socials at Fantasy Football Fellas on YouTube and TikTok. The FF Fellas on Instagram. FF Fellas on the X. Fantasy Football Shorts on YouTube if you like to watch our short form content over there. But we'll be back tomorrow with 24 players who will make or break your lineup. Some starts, some sits at each position. Hopefully, get you out there and win that week 5, whether you're 1-4, 4-1, whatever you may be. So make sure you join tomorrow. Make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. But we will see you, like I said, tomorrow. Deuces.
Deuces.